The 2022 Virtual Business Conference, February 25th. Doug Wenger. U, the tennis CEO of U, Incorporated.
It is my privilege to introduce Doug Wenger, who's the president of 18 Main Management and 18 Main Sports Management, where he provides technology and business consulting for many industries and recreational sports organizations. He has nearly 40 years experience and has received numerous awards for his leadership in global information technology, and was a senior vice president and chief information officer for Nova Solutions and a global program director in worldwide information technology for Kellogg Company. Doug is a USPTA elite professional and has been a leader in the industry, serving as USTA Midwest president and leading numerous USTA committees and serving in leadership roles with the National Senior Games Association. He's a tennis professional at a club in Ohio and is a frequent presenter at technology and tennis conferences. And I give you Doug Wenger.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and I appreciate everyone joining us today. I have to say that I have sat in on a number of the other presentations, and it's been a thrill to listen and hear from some of you all experts in the industry. And I have learned some things that I will take back and make me a better tennis pro as well. I hope that I can share some information with you today that can supplement a lot of the information you've already heard. I think I may come at it from a little bit different angle with my background, and I'm going to get right into it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey. I am probably maybe more of a non-traditional path to tennis, to being a tennis professional. I started out at Kellogg Company out of college. I was a computer science person, and I worked in their information technology department for over 21 years. I was a global program director, and that took me all over the world for systems projects, if you will, Kellogg being a global company. In 2001, I relocated to Ohio, where I was given the opportunity to become a corporate officer in a publicly traded company called Nova Solutions. Nova Solutions was a successor company to a company called GenCorp, and some of you may not remember GenCorp as being at one time the owner of Penn Tennis Balls. So those two positions, almost 37 years, 36, 37 years, took me all over the world. I've lived in 4 or 5 different places, including living in Europe. I've traveled to countless numbers of countries, 3.5 million air miles, putting in business systems and learning about the manufacturing business, if you will. And I have found that I've been able to apply some of those principles in my, I'll say my next career, the career I'm currently in as a tennis professional and consultant. I started 2 different consulting businesses about 4 years ago. One is called 18 Main Sports Management, where I do consulting for recreational type endeavors, if you will, organizations. I also teach tennis as well. And I also have a consulting business where I help small to medium-sized businesses mostly implement technology projects because they don't necessarily have the resources to do something on a much larger scale and with large staff. A little bit about my background in education. I have a degree from Ferris State University. I was a member of their tennis team, but I also was a computer science or computer information systems major. And then I actually got my master's degree from Western Michigan University. And kind of a little trivia there is I actually played tennis for Western for 2 years prior to transferring to Ferris to finish my bachelor's degree. And then I came back to Western for my master's. Many of you probably know Scott Schultz. I was on the same tennis team with Scott Schultz at Western Michigan. I started volunteering with tennis. I did from my college days, and I've done a number of things, as Kevin mentioned earlier, including president of the Midwest section, and I've served on a number of national committees and currently council chair for adult tennis. A few years ago, the National Senior Games Association approached me and asked me if I would chair their tennis program. The National Senior Games is an Olympic-style event. It's held every other year. It'll be in Florida this year, and it's about 10,000 athletes, and our tennis event is over 1,000 entrants from age 50 to age 100, singles, doubles, and mixed. And most importantly, I think at this point in my life is right here in the middle. About 20 years ago, I became certified as a tennis professional through the USPTA to help as I did some grassroots programming. I wanted to learn and stayed with that. And I taught part-time up until a few years ago when I became much more active as a tennis pro. And I teach tennis at a club in Northeast Ohio. And now I want to pivot a little bit to my business background, if you will, outside of tennis. And I want to start with 6 different areas that I have been able to kind of transfer, if you will, or learn from my business or apply from my business experience into the tennis industry, if you will. And these are market development, hard work, relationships, communications, R&D, which we do in manufacturing and other industries. That also, I believe, applies to the tennis industry or the recreational sports industry. And then goodwill, reputation, and personal attributes. There's many others. Tom Douglas just talked about a few. Scott Mitchell talked about some. Mike Woody talked about some yesterday. So I'm going to touch on some things that maybe some others have already said and maybe bring a slightly different perspective or angle on it. One takeaway from this is I've learned over the years that you can control and influence these a lot. We all probably have a manager, a boss out there somewhere, depending on our level in our organization, but we all answer to somebody, we're accountable to somebody. But what I've learned over the years is that you are individual. We all can control and influence a lot of these activities in these areas. So I wanted to start with market development or market research. One of the things that I've tried to apply in my life as a tennis professional is what's my market? Do I want to kind of target myself to a certain age or activity level or skill level? What are my client goals? Do I want to focus on high performance or entry level, or is it everything? What's my geography? Is my geography just the local residents in the community around the club where I teach, or should I and could I go out and expand my market? What types of programs? Is it just lessons? Is it clinics, tournaments, National Tennis Month, things like that? So I think it's important as a professional kind of set what your market really is. And sometimes this is, you have, control over this. Some of them might be a little bit less easy to manage, but it's something that I think we should look at. And you want to be very specific or very broad in your programming. So things that I look at is, what are my competition? What's my value proposition? I think Scott Mitchell mentioned that earlier today about the experience. The broader your market, the more skill sets you have to have. If you're going to be running tournaments, if you're going to be running clinics, if you're going to be giving lessons, if you're going to be organizing and being a tennis director, it's a different set of skills. Are there potential partners in joint ventures out there? I know in my business career, we did a lot of joint ventures because we didn't have the resources to do everything ourselves. So is there a partnership? Emerging and underdeveloped markets versus established markets. Breaking into an established market could be difficult because people are already there. An underserved or an underdeveloped market is also difficult, but might provide you some opportunities. I know some people have talked about entrepreneurs and being careful not to get yourself too thin. What are the unmet needs out there? So one takeaway from this that I've kind of seen or learned is over my career is penetrating an existing market is challenging. So people are already there. And if you're going to try to break into something that's already there, like at Kellogg in the cereal business, Cheerios were pretty well entrenched, very difficult to get into that market space, that particular demographic of consumer. But there's also opportunities. If you see an unmet need, you have an advantage if you're the first mover into that particular market. The challenge with that is you have to keep going because you can't just do it, get there, and then stay there. You have to continue to innovate. And that's what I've learned over my career is that in business, outside of tennis, you might come up with a great new product. Pretty quickly, people are going to start reacting to that and your competitors, and then you've got to continue to stay ahead of that so that you are always looked at as sort of the first mover. Hard work. This is one, I think Tom Douglas mentioned in the last session about the the comment that the person made about pre-selling your board of directors and how that stuck with Tom for his whole career. Well, I have one that stuck with me for my whole career. And I want to start with my first day at Kellogg Company. There's about 30 of us in a room. It was a multi-day orientation. The people that were in the room were recent graduates or experienced professionals. We weren't all just out of college. Some of them had moved in from other companies. So we had the top people from food science and business schools, engineers. We had people coming into Kellogg from Procter & Gamble, Unilever, top consumer products companies. Mr. Lamothe, Bill Lamothe, was the CEO at Kellogg Company. He happened to be a tennis player as well. I didn't know Mr. Lamothe before I started working at Kellogg. He came into this multi-day seminar, and he gave us a few minutes of his time and talked a little bit about his philosophy of the company. So again, 30 people in the room, some really high-powered, very top-level university graduates or have been successful executives or business people at other companies. And this is what Mr. Lamothe said. You all have outstanding credentials or business experience, or you wouldn't be here. Kellogg was a very desirable place to work. You all come with a lot of ideas. And then Mr. Lamothe stopped and he kind of raised his hand and he said, beyond all that, though, there is no substitution for hard work. And Mr. Lamothe was probably a bit old school, and this was 1980. That has never left me. The difference between a lot of these people, I think they came in and thought, oh, well, I'm just smart, and I'm smarter than everybody else, and I'm going to make an impact. But at Kellogg, it was hard work. You really had to work hard. And I looked at myself and I said, I didn't go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or University of Michigan or Dartmouth. My degrees were from Western Michigan and Ferris State. And I said, nobody's going to out hustle or outwork me. And I tried to apply that in my life as a tennis professional as well. Relationships. Some other people that I've met along the way in my career have really had an influence and really made an impact on my life as a business professional and then in the tennis industry. And one of the things that I've learned is the power of personal or handwritten note. Doug Conant, who's the retired CEO of Campbell Soup Company, happened to be the guest speaker at the USTA semi-annual meeting a few years ago. Mr. Conant was a college tennis player at Northwestern and was a college teammate of John Vagosin, who at the time was the president of the USTA. Mr. Conant wrote approximately 20 to 30 handwritten notes per week to his employees or colleagues. And he did this for his entire career. And he talked at the USTA event about how he felt this really had a significant impact on people that he was working with and associating with and so forth. Mr. Lamothe, the CEO at Kellogg Company, sent a personal note to every employee who had a promotion at Kellogg. So these are two very busy, very successful business executives who took the time to write a handwritten note or a personally signed note of congratulations, perhaps condolence, encouragement, and so forth. And then I want to talk about Dr. Bonifer. When I was in high school, I injured my knee. And this is back before, MRIs were popular and things like that. And he was my childhood physician. He was a general practitioner. And I injured my knee and I went to see him and, he helped me a little bit, but, there was no big orthopedic practice there where I lived in a small town. And he kind of followed me and, encouraged me to go, stretch and ice and all those things we did back then. I started doing a little bit better in tennis. And one day I got a note in the mail from Dr. Bonifer. He said, congratulations on your tennis achievements. Next up is the $10,000 playoff. Now, I never got to the $10,000 playoff, but Dr. Bonifer to me was like this revered person. He was our family doctor. And he sent me this note out of the blue. I had no idea that I was going to be receiving this note. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And this was over 50 years ago. So I tried to incorporate those learnings into my professional life. I've tried to write thank you notes or congratulation notes or encouragement notes, sympathy notes, what have you. And this is some of the reaction that I've received from people, mostly in my business career or tennis career, some personal, but it's amazing to me the reaction that I get from these. I put them in the mail, I put a stamp on them. Sometimes I hand them to the player or the parent at the club if I, don't have a stamp. But I almost every single time get some kind of reaction. And I put a few of those thoughts on the page here. There's a book called The Art of the Handwritten Note, Recovering the Lost Art of Communication, and something to that effect. I've got this book sitting in my library right behind me. It talks about tone and opportunity to write a note, and maybe things. I'm not the world's best orator or writer, but it just kind of helped me kind of understand a little bit about kind of common courtesies and things like that in doing these things. And I want to show a picture of a young man who has a UTR of about 1.2. So this person's not necessarily looking to be the next number one player in the world. He's 11 years old, 12 years old, and he wants to play tennis in high school. And he has, days that go great and days that don't go so great. And now he's gotten to the point where he's actually competing against players that are 2 to 3 years older than him in some of our in-house leagues. And he sometimes gets a little discouraged because he's playing these older players, and sometimes he gets his nose bloodied a little bit. So I sent him a note encouraging him and congratulating him on how his progress has been made. And his mother's note is at the top there. He received your card. You are the best. And there he is holding the card. And this was, a couple months ago. So to me, for 10 minutes, $1.50 for a note card and a stamp, it's a small investment. It has a huge impact. One of the best gifts I ever received was somebody gave me, or as a gift, a set of personalized stationery and envelopes. But I've since, over the course of my career, I had some of these made up when I was at Omnova Solutions. These were just little note cards with my name on the inside. I would just write a note to employees or colleagues. Huge impact. And I think it's sort of a lost art. And I try to avoid doing this through email. I think it's too impersonal. Communication, let's move on. What is always near the top when it comes to surveys and what employees and colleagues think? Communication. And I've been through every type of survey you can imagine, every corporate improvement project. Communication is almost number 1 or 2 every single time. So no communication, the wrong method, late, inconsistent, impersonal, insincere, incomplete, accurate, inaccurate, or other. So sometimes communication is a little thing that can go a long way. And I think sometimes we take for granted that people maybe are just reading our minds, and we kind of tend to put things on cruise control. So I want to just do a little survey here. Think of some industries that are notorious for not returning calls or inquiries in a timely manner. I think you probably all have some of those in mind. I have a few that aggravate me as a consumer, okay? And my question is, are you the tennis professional, Inc., you being in charge of your basically career, are you one of them? Are you participating as one of the people who don't return calls or messages in a timely manner? So I just kind of challenge us all to think about, are we communicating effectively? And it's not necessarily how elegant our communications is. A lot of times it's just simple things like timeliness. Do we follow up with a sense of urgency? Dan Gilbert, I had an opportunity to meet Mr. Gilbert about 10 years ago in Cleveland. He's the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's also the founder of Quicken Loans and a very, very successful business person. And there have been some stories written about his business practices. One of them is every employee has to respond to all incoming phone calls and emails on the day they were received. He mentioned this in the presentation that I sat in on, something to this effect, but Business Insider has published this. And the question is, wow, difficult. But if you get in the habit, I found if you get in the habit of doing this, it can be something that can make a difference in your credibility and your ability to basically attract customers and retain them. I think Dan Gilbert has something going for him. I think he's onto something. He's worth $25 billion as according to Forbes in 2022. But his business has been built on a sense of urgency and some of that, I guess I'll call it hustle. So I want to put this into kind of a personal story, a case study that I had. I'm looking at the time here. A case study that I have experienced personally. A potential client contacted the club. They were pursuing tennis lessons for their 11 to 12-year-old novice to intermediate player with high school tennis aspirations. And they were referred to the club by other parents. There was a message left to a pro for follow-up. Multiple days had passed. There was no communication from the person who was asked to follow up. Could be for many reasons, but to the client, to the customer, there was no communication. They tried two more times, and finally, the desk manager at the club reached out to another pro, who happened to be me. I called the same day at my first opportunity. That player became a 100-hour private lesson client, now plays 6 to 10 tournaments a year, participated in clinics, all because, in my view, of a simple return phone call. I had a coworker that I used at Kellogg. He used to say, "No news is news." And sometimes just acknowledging that you've received a message could be all it takes to have to tell somebody that you're on it and you're going to get back to them. Now, I'm not suggesting that the people on this call are doing this, but I'm just saying this has been my experience. And it has been my experience as both a provider and also a consumer of recreational services and other services as well outside of our industry. So I guess the question here is, I put together this little health check. How often? Never, sometimes, always. Voicemail same day, email same day, text, other message forms. Lesson summaries to clients after a lesson's done. I know when I go to the doctor, next morning I get a download in my chart where I can go and look at the notes from my meeting with my doctor or my blood work or whatever. So how often do we communicate on these things? So I know this is difficult. I mean, our industry, we spend a lot of time on court. It's very difficult to do these types of things on a regular basis and repeated. I thought about a couple things that maybe we could consider. Many of the CEOs I talked about, Mr. Lamoth, Dan Gilbert, and Doug Conant, for example, they all had executive assistants to help them. Have you considered, or any of us considered, asking someone to assist you in responding to client inquiries? Maybe some of the larger clubs, larger organizations, you have somebody that's responsible for interfacing with people who submit inquiries to your club. Would a modest weekly investment or commission for an assistant bring you more business? And I'm talking about you personally. What if you co-opt a college student or somebody to say, hey, would you be willing to help me respond to these folks so I know that I'm aware of their inquiry, and maybe you can even help kind of pre-schedule a few things and get some of the basic questions out of the way, kind of like a physician's assistant or the scheduling nurse would do for a surgeon, for example. So a small investment in time results in a more effective you, the tennis professional, client confidence, and as I mentioned earlier, my colleague who had the saying, no news is news. Sometimes just letting them know, I got your message. I don't have an answer yet, but I'll get back to you tomorrow. So R&D. R&D is an important part of any business that manufactures products, sells services, because you can't sell typewriters in the age of computers. And there are some companies that have gone out of business because they didn't innovate fast enough. I want to talk a little bit about new product vitality index. This is something that in the food industry and even in the materials industry at Omnova, it was important to know what percentage of our revenue are from products that are sold. Here's the math. The new product vitality index is the revenue that you've received that are new products within the last 5 years divided by the total revenue that you've received for that time period. So for a year, for example, you would maybe make this measure. Maybe you measure it quarterly. So anything that you've come up with in the last 5 years divided by the total revenue. So for example, if I had $10,000 in revenue this quarter from products and services that were introduced in the last 5 years, and my total revenue was 50% or 50,000, then my new product vitality index is 20%. And a lot of companies, it's different industries have different models or methods, if you will, and there's nuances to this. But basically, it's trying to understand and track how much of my product sales or my services are from products and services that I'm developing new, that might be innovative, cutting edge, and might help me maintain my leadership position in my market. Professional development. I look at myself now, my body, my mind, my knowledge of the industry as it's my factory. And if I don't maintain that factory, improve it, support it, learn, adapt, I'm going to be failing over time. So I tried to relate this to my information technology background. So when I was a computer programmer or systems analyst or business system manager or director or vice president, whatever my level was, there were things that I had to do to learn from an industry perspective. What's the industry doing? I had to keep up on that. What's the industry doing to best practices? That could be both my industry that I'm in and also the technology that I work in. But in this case, what are other food companies doing? What was Kraft doing? What's General Mills doing? What's Nabisco doing? What's Procter & Gamble doing? Then in the technology side, I also had to be up to date on what are the new devices and technologies that are coming out. So, the move to mobile devices was huge in my career. We went from green screens, we call them, the old computer terminals, to handheld devices. There's now more handheld devices in the world than there are people. And then role. I had to move from an individual contributing role, where I'm programming computers myself, or I'm doing individual lessons, to leading teams and people. Big transition. So when I look at the tennis and racket sports rec professional, I see parallels. I have to continue to learn and understand what is going on in the industry. I have to continue to learn and understand technology, rackets, strings, balls, shoes, apparel, all the other things, ball machines, line calling devices, all kinds of stuff. Video technology. It's awesome, but I have to keep up with that. And then I've had to learn in transitioning from an individual contributor, perhaps as a tennis pro, to leading teams of people, such as running the National Senior Games Association tennis tournament, which is 37 draws and over 1,000 players for 2 weeks, and getting that all organized. So I think it's important that we continue to invest in ourselves as our factory and our engine. And one of the things that I've always kind of looked at is, I have an hour open, I'm eating lunch. Do I just randomly browse the web, or do I go online at USPTA, for example, and look at 10 or 15 one-minute clinics? There's tons of resources out there. Test panels. The consumer products and food industry has test panels. I happen to be on one of them at Kellogg. Small groups, we stay together, we're called upon throughout the year. We test ideas and products, often blind. So they don't tell us what they're giving us, really. In my case, they happen to figure out that I knew the flavor of Fruit Loops pretty well. I ate a lot of Fruit Loops. And so we provide them feedback, and they have a very controlled environment. They have these products they're trying to test. They get people that they know. They keep them consistent so that people can give them feedback, A or B, B or C, C or D, what you like, what didn't you like. I've tried to incorporate some of that as a tennis professional. I'll take a client and I'll say, look, I just came back from a seminar and I learned something that I'd like to incorporate in my lessons or my clinics. Would you be willing to come out and hit with me for 20 minutes? I want to try this out. I want to get your feedback. It's been tremendously helpful. So I think some of these opportunities are parallel to our industry, and many of you are probably doing this already. The takeaway for me is new markets, new opportunities, and innovation is important. I think we also have to be careful not to fragment ourselves too much. I've seen organizations and businesses get spread too thin. Innovation culture will help avoid the stale factor. Avoid overcomplicating and fragmenting your products and services, however. You get spread too thin, don't do anything right or well. Test new products and services in a laboratory. I think this parallels really good from that carries over from the manufacturing business to the tennis industry. And also, in my mind, professional education is paramount. It's an investment in you as a tennis professional. Goodwill, reputation, and other attributes, personal attributes. This is key. Not sure why that others is in there, but I'll leave that in there for now. I'm going to start with a reputation is a very fragile thing. That is a comment from Kellogg Company. We all had it in our offices, in the correspondence of the company, and the company basically is saying our reputation is the most important thing we have, because if people don't trust us and believe that they're getting good value and nutrition and all those things, and that we do good things for the world, it doesn't matter. So I've tried to incorporate that philosophy into my life, if you will, primarily my professional life. Am I dependable and reliable? Do I act with integrity, authenticity, ethical? Am I on time? I think there was mention about that earlier. Problem solver, team player. Billie Jean King talks about this a lot. Follow through and follow up, and these others that I talked about earlier. So I think being prepared, passion, treatment of others. Okay, so these are all things that are important personal attributes that have nothing to do, in my view, with whether the angle of the racket's right on a forehand or a backhand, or you're hitting the trophy pose on an overhead. So what I've tried to do is really focus on my reputation and maintaining goodwill of my clients. It's built steadily. You don't get this overnight, but it can be damaged really quickly. And treat this like your most prized possession. Very, very important in my mind that you act with the utmost of respect and professionalism. And I think Tom mentioned about the shoes and the appearance. I think that's very important as well. There's so many things that are parallel between the outside of the industry that we're in and our industry. A couple summaries, and we'll close down here. You are the CEO of You, the Tennis Professional Incorporated. There are practices from other businesses that are transferable. I believe these can help you be more successful, and you determine your success. I originally felt like the word influence over the last year or so, as I've been working on this particular theme in my business practice, my consulting practice. I used to use the word influence, but the more I thought about it, the more I feel that it's determined. I believe that we determine our success. And I'll just give you one example. At Kellogg Company, I said day one, nobody's going to outwork me or out-hustle me. And I was very successful there. I had lots of opportunities. I had great leaders that I worked around, great mentors, traveled all over the world. Some of those experiences were more rewarding and fun than others, but I did it. There was a lot of sacrifices, missed a lot of birthdays, and so forth. And there came a time where I felt like my percentage of determination and influence on my success there was probably getting to the point where it wasn't going to go, where I was probably not going to go any further. It happens to all of us at some point. And at that point, I had an opportunity at a number of different places, and I decided to make a move. So what I did is I basically said, I've still determined my success, but I'm going to need to make a change in order for me to remain in the position of determining my success. And that's what I did in 2001. I made a change. It wasn't easy to make that change, but I felt like it was important for me to do that, to maintain the control, if you will, having my hands on the wheel at 2 and 10, and I never looked back. So I very much feel that we have the opportunity to do those things. One last little slide here is some books that you might want to consider. These are old school. I will tell you, they're old school. Think or Twice is a great book on creative thinking. It's been out there for 25 years. Michael Mihalko, it's a handbook. You don't have to read it. You can thumb around pages. And he talks about, in one of his editions, how they combined gasoline and food to create the convenience store concept. Because back in my day, gasoline was sold at gas stations and food was sold at grocery stores. Now they're together. He talked about how the creative thinking that got them to that point. Touch Points, Doug Conant's book about leadership, The Art of the Handwritten Note. Billie Jean King has a great book on pressure as a privilege. Probably many of you have seen it, read it. Just life lessons things. The Manager's Handbook of Quotations. I love it. If you get stale someday and you're looking for something kind of catchy to say, there's a big, thick book on nothing but quotations on every topic: leadership, relationships, sports, working hard. It's a great book. With that, I'm going to stop. I think we have I just wanted to thank everybody for joining. I hope I've been able to share something that is going to be useful to you in your endeavors, and it's been an honor to be part of this conference.